All right, I'm going to admit it that no matter how much I use statistics and how much of my life revolves around statistics, um, I still don't understand it. It's like super difficult to understand what is actually going on, right? So, one of the challenging parts of it is the null hypothesis. And you end up getting multiple um, negations that happen, and you're trying to reject the null hypothesis, and you're trying to think in your head basically three different negations that happened, and I can never get that straightened out in my head, no matter how many times I've looked at it. I understand the logic makes sense. The whole idea of it makes total sense. I understand why it's happening, but I still can't figure it out in my head, and I have to really think about it. It is not intuitive in any sort of way to think about null hypothesis and um, the rejection of the null and all that kind of stuff. It's never intuitive, and I have to sit there and think about what is going on. And the problem is that statistics is becoming increasingly more cumbersome, right? The sort of expectation that is put on researchers is higher and higher in terms of the expectation. And there is more chance that there's going to be mistakes that are going to happen. I'm actually of the opinion that we should go back to just simple correlations. Um, and maybe a nice little graph, and that should be nice enough. But the problem is much of the field does not like that, right? I would say 95% of the field would not like that, and they would sort of come up with all sorts of reasons why, various different researchers would come up with all sorts of different reasons why that's not appropriate. But in my experience, the more that you add of all these different layers of complexity, the more chance you're just going to have for error, the more likely that things are going to be screwed up, and you're never going to be able to pick up on those things. It's very challenging to actually see something in the data, even if it's a very simple statistic. Um, Even correlation may be too difficult to show. Like showing a picture, a scatter plot should be enough that you should be able to get a paper published with that, or just a simple, um, you know, correlation where you fit to a line, a best fit line between an X and a Y that should be publishable, if it's an interesting story. But the problem is that one that will there's going to be too many people that will come up with different exceptions about what's happening. And frankly, none of those things are ever convincing to me. I'm never convinced when somebody says, well, why didn't you think about this? Or why didn't you think about that? It never really gives me insight, right? And the thing is like, okay, if you actually come up with a hypothesis or you come up with a theory and then you test it, and then you test it with very simple statistics, very simple ideas, if you do that and you still get, or you get a result that you sort of intended to, or even just a correlation that was unintended, should be interesting enough. I don't understand why we're so preoccupied with coming up with all of these different excuses about what is where's these threats to validity, and coming up with more valid insights. You know, in the real world, I'm more of a sort of pragmatist. Sort of, this is this would be interesting just to show in the real world some very simple statistic should be good enough, right? In real world data, where it's very simple, of showing something. But how do we? Why do we go through all of this rigmarole of showing things when it's just going to increase greater chances of making mistakes, especially as we start working with larger amounts of data? Um, I'm just unconvinced with that. So today I spent the entire day, I probably spent now a day and a half trying to find the right instrument, what's called an instrument, right? So something that is exogenous. And my so exogenous being is outside of a system. Now, the thing is nothing in this world is exogenous. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Right? So in my system, I actually have something that's genuinely exogenous. Um, but it's hard to sort of pick up on this thing. It was like a really significant policy change that happened, and a very significant, like, crazy event that happened in our world. Um, and those things, by all means, are exogenous to the system. But because we're using messy data, it's hard to sort of show that with the data, right? Whenever you do all these crazy statistics to show over identifying, restrictions and all of this kind of stuff. It's a bunch of statistics you probably don't really need to understand about it, but um, just basically showing that this thing is exogenous to it. It's outside of a system that can be predicting something. Now, that, like I say, because it's messy data, virtually nothing is exogenous. Nothing exists outside. Basically, you need to be the only way it's exogenous. Even in an experiment, it's not exogenous, right? You could still come up with some sort of factor or spurious reason what's going to happen. But you almost need to be God, right? Like you need to be, okay, I'm just going to shoot this sort of bolt down from lightning, or this lightning bolt, and all of a sudden people are going to change everything about them. Um, and that is just an unrealistic expectation um, of the world. So wouldn't it be just better, right? In my view, isn't it just better to show um, just very simple stats, right? Like just a, hey, here's a picture. Um, that's it. Here is a correlation between five variables. Why do we need to throw in a bazillion different control variables when they're not supposed to make a difference in the first place, right? Like if you look at it statistically, it's not supposed to make a difference anyways. It's just accounting for error that's happening. And yeah, okay, if you're accounting for more error in the system, wouldn't it be just as effective, and it illustrates the same point, if you could show that regardless if any of those control variables are in there or not, right? Like, why are we going and doing all of this rigmarole? Why is that? Um, and I think partly of why this has sort of gone in this way is because of the peer review system. Um, and rather than communicating some of this, we have to communicate absolute surety in the results that we actually have. And if we sort of even allude that there is any uncertainty to it, it's just going to be rejected in the peer review system. So I don't think that we can change this peer review system very quickly. I think it's vastly problematic, but it's the institution that we actually have. I don't think it's great, and I think it's inferior to sort of thinking through various different problems of how to do this. But it's what we actually have at this moment, and what we need to really start to think about is, especially as reviewers or editors on the other side or whatever, right? Like think about um, doing the rigmarole, like getting people to do all this rigmarole, is it actually going to benefit in any sort of way? And my suggestion is almost no. Um, I don't think that's the case. I think what would be better is if we actually disclosed what we're doing, have a more interactive session between reviewers and the people that are writing this, more sort of developmental, where you're like sitting down as if you are working with the data and you're sitting there maybe for a day. You sit through an anonymous, you know, peer review platform, for example, where you're working through these things and getting people to sort of show, okay, I understand what's going on here, understand that there is something problematic. And if you actually seen the data, if you understood this stuff, you'd have a much better sense of what's actually going on than some stupid numbers that are published in some paper that God knows what happened with those numbers, right? If you actually seen the data and you looked at it and you actually seen what was going on, you would have a much better sense. But the problem is nobody's willing to put in the time and the effort to actually do that. So, here's the predicament. We're stuck in terms of what to do. I am more of let's see what's going on, then let's get some more data and statistics and things like that. And I think that's where the emphasis should be. All right. Sorry about the rant. Take care and have a wonderful day.